Protesters in downtown Berlin shouted, "I want my life back." Germany has implemented a range of social distancing measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, which has killed more than 5,800 people there. Much of the country began easing these restrictions last week, allowing small businesses to reopen.
Italy is preparing to announce measures to restart most of its business activity by May 4th. Italy's prime minister says companies will first have to implement strict safety measures. Chinese officials say all COVID-19 patients in Wuhan have been discharged from the city's hospitals. The coronavirus was first identified in Wuhan. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson returns to work tomorrow after 3 weeks. NPR's Frank Langfitt reports he's facing mounting pressure to present a plan to lift the lockdown.
Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who's been standing in for Johnson, told the BBC the UK needs to move towards a new normal, and that British people will be observing some forms of social distancing for some time. Daily coronavirus infections are in decline, and officials are deeply concerned about a second, even deadlier spike later, which, among other things, could damage public confidence. On Saturday, the number of people who died from COVID-19 in British hospitals passed 20,000. However, that figure does not include deaths in nursing homes and private homes. The actual countrywide death count is thought to be many thousands higher. Frank Langford, NPR News.
This is NPR.
Live from KQED News, I'm Amy King. The Santa Clara County Superior Court will reduce or expunge close to 12,000 marijuana convictions next week. Although the state decriminalized recreational marijuana in 2016, people with a conviction have had to file a petition and attend a hearing to get it cleared, and that could take months. Presiding Judge Deborah Ryan said in a statement that clearing those records will help people who are applying for jobs, an issue she says that's especially important now as businesses begin the process of reopening. An attorney representing Northern California fire survivors has admitted to taking funding from Wall Street players in the PG&E bankruptcy. KQED's Lily Jamali reports that those firms have been negotiating against the victims he represents.
Since the 2017 and 2018 wildfires, Texas-based lawyer Michael Watts has amassed a client roster of 16,000 out of 70,000 survivors with claims against PG&E. That's more than any other lawyer. Watts helped craft a multi-billion-dollar settlement to compensate them. This week, he acknowledged that his expensive litigation has been funded in part by Wall Street heavyweights on opposite ends of the bargaining table from the survivors. They include Centerbridge Partners, which owns PG&E stocks, bonds, insurance companies. It stands to reap a giant windfall once the bankruptcy is over. Centerbridge didn't respond to KQED's request for comment. Some survivors are asking, did this financial arrangement influence Watts as he helped broker the deal for survivors? He tells KQED it didn't. Watts disclosed the financial ties to a group of clients in December. He says the arrangement was made by his financial broker without his knowledge, but told KQED he knew about it while he was negotiating the deal. I'm Lily Jamali, KQED News.
And in Berkeley, I'm Queenie Kipp, KQED News. Support comes from Personal Capital, offering instant access to financial tools and advice from home. PersonalCapital.com. Support for NPR comes from the Lemelson Foundation, committed to improving lives through invention in U.S. and developing countries, and working to inspire and enable the next generation of inventors. More information is available at lemelson.org. And the listeners of KQED. This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Luna Garcia-Navarro. Good morning, and thanks for being with us. We begin today with a look at testing in this country. As the coronavirus continues to spread, getting tested for the disease here is still hard. Consider two different stories. One is from Ashley Keitel. She lives in Houston. She began having symptoms on March 16th, so she went to an urgent care clinic where she tested negative for the flu. But when she asked to take a COVID-19 test,
they said they weren't going to test me there because I was young and I don't have any risk factors.
The next day, a friend told her about some community health centers in Houston that were offering free testing. They asked her the usual questions, her symptoms, if she traveled to China recently, if she'd been in contact with anyone who had COVID-19.
I didn't know if I'd come in contact with someone, but the guy was kind of hinting like, if you say that, then I can push you forward for a test.
She got the test and waited for 2 weeks to hear back.
I mean, there's so much uncertainty right now, and so then waiting on this test was just another layer of uncertainty.
Finally, the results came back. She was positive. Ashley was then told that she would hear from the Houston Health Department within a week. It took them 3 weeks to reach her this past Wednesday. By then, Ashley had already recovered. So that was a case from last month. But what about testing now? Let's hear from Grace Belmont of Roxbury, Massachusetts.
I had been ill for a while, struggled with a sore throat and moved into my lungs and increasing fatigue. And throughout that process, I sought out testing and was repeatedly told no.
When her symptoms worsened, she ended up in the emergency room.
And by that time, I realized I needed to lie in order to get tested. So I said that I had a fever, which I had not had. And because of all my other symptoms, I was finally able to get a test.
She said the doctor seemed nervous, quickly testing just one side and not sticking the swab very far back. The test was negative, but she continued to get sicker.
It was very alarming to find my health going downhill at a rapid clip and not being able to get any help. And the doctors, I could tell, were also very frustrated with the restrictions that had been put on them as well.
That was early April. Just this past week, she got tested again, and it was a much different experience.
My doctor was able to request a test. I went to a designated COVID hospital. I met with a trained nurse who reported that he did approximately 70 tests a day. He had a lot of experience.
Again, the test was negative, but Grace continues to have severe symptoms, so not quite trusting the result. She is keeping her distance from her family just in case she does have the coronavirus. So in between the test and the result is the wait for the phone to ring. And on the other end of that phone call is often someone like our next guest. Dr. Caroline Schulman is a third-year resident at George Washington University, and she wrote an article this past week in Stat about her experience informing people that they tested positive for COVID-19. And she joins us now from the hospital where she's on a 13-hour shift. Thanks so much for taking a break and being with us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
I imagine it's really scary for people to find out that they've tested positive. What kind of reactions do you get?
Most people I found were, especially in March, when we knew so much less than we do now, and we still have a lot to learn, they had a lot of questions, a lot of anxiety. So I had some folks cry. Some people were relieved to just talk to someone. They hadn't been isolating in their house waiting for their test results. And then some people were really relieved to find out an explanation for their symptoms. And by the time I had called them, sometimes they were feeling better.
I understand we have to keep people's privacy, but you did, in your article, give sort of general descriptions of some of the stories that you heard. Can you tell us a few now? What kinds of people were testing positive, and what did that tell you?
The people I found testing positive were from all walks of life. Our low-income population seemed to be especially more vulnerable in this pandemic. The issue of overcrowding in housing in D.C. and many other cities is ongoing. And in the setting of a pandemic, it further highlights our needs for more social services in these areas. Some resources did exist, and I would get what I could to my patients, but it was definitely a role outside of what I had done previously in terms of practicing medicine. It expanded into other areas that really affected people's health and public health.
You described a man called Jeff who lives alone and who has a chronic blood condition, but who had to resume his job as a ride-share driver because he needed to make ends meet.
Yeah, unfortunately that wasn't an uncommon reaction that I would find when telling people their results. I really think people were trying the best they could, but some people really couldn't miss a day's work or a week's work.
The headline of this article was, "It was my job to call people whose COVID-19 tests were positive. That taught me a lot about medicine, the law, and society." Can you explain what you learned?
Yeah, I think it highlights the fact that health depends on so much more than just hospitals. It's really difficult, as probably anyone, but especially as a physician, to know how to help in those situations. I wasn't trained on how to help someone who lives in an overcrowded house self-isolate. Like, I wasn't trained on how to help somebody get food. Like, it wasn't on my boards. It wasn't on the tests I took. I just was determined and dedicated and tried to figure out everything I could while I was making these phone calls.
That was Dr. Carolyn Schulman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
There are two types of tests taking place right now. The ones we just heard about happen when you're worried you might have a live infection. The others are antibody tests, also called serological tests. Antibody tests try and see who was infected in the past, and some officials hope they can be used to decide who can safely go back to work because they had some kind of immunity. There are now more than 100 different types of antibody tests available here. Typically, it would take months or even longer to get approval from the Food and Drug Administration, which regulates medical products. But after criticism for slowing down the process, President Trump removed approval barriers, allowing companies to take their antibody tests straight to market. Now, a House Oversight Subcommittee has raised the alarm, saying that after a briefing by federal officials, they found the FDA is unable to validate the accuracy of these tests. Illinois Democrat Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi chairs the House Oversight Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy, and he joins us now from Schaumburg, Illinois. Good morning.
Hey, good morning.
So as I mentioned, your committee was briefed by officials about antibody tests coming onto the market. What did they tell you?
Well, they basically told us that there are two paths that makers of these tests can utilize to get their tests sold. One is to basically get authorization from the FDA to sell them, and 4 companies have taken advantage of that. And then the other is not to get any authorization from the FDA and go ahead and sell them, and 107 have taken advantage of that, and unfortunately a wild west of unregulated tests are now proliferating, and our biggest concerns are that they're unreliable, inaccurate, and in many cases making fraudulent claims about their testing results.
But isn't there a bit of a problem here? Because on the one hand, there was a lot of criticism that the Trump administration and the FDA was just holding the reins too tight, and that they weren't getting tests out to people who needed them. And now there's this other complaint that there's just too many tests and there's not enough oversight. It can sound like it's unclear really which direction the government should go on.
Well, I think that, because these serological tests are so important, because the Trump administration is really premising the reopening of the economy on these tests, it's important that the tests be accurate and that the test makers not make any fraudulent claims about them. There is a way to go about balancing the need to get a lot of testing out there with the need for making sure that they're accurate. And that's called the emergency use authorization route. That allows makers to even begin using and selling the tests at the same time that they're seeking authorization.
On Friday, the FDA Administrator Stephen Hahn was asked about the antibody tests over which you raised the alarm. Here's what he said at the White House briefing.
We provide a flexibility. What we've told manufacturers is that in order to market in the U.S., they have to validate their tests. They have to tell us that they validated their tests. And then in the package insert, they have to let people know, end users, labs, etc., that those tests were not authorized by FDA.
Does this reassure you in any way?
No, because what he's basically saying is that these makers have to self-validate. And because of this kind of voluntary compliance type of regimen, there's absolutely no incentive for a junk test maker to actually produce their results to the FDA.
So what would you advise people to do?
I think right now only use a test that has been authorized by the FDA. They've listed the handful of tests that have actually been authorized on their website. I think the FDA needs to take action to clear the market of all unauthorized tests. They should require authorization before any of these tests are sold, and then they need to put out clear standards as to what characterizes a good test and what do you do with the test results. That's the most important thing from a consumer standpoint. You know, that's where the FDA really needs to step up.
Representative Raja Krishnamurthy chairs the House Oversight Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Lulu.
And you're listening to NPR News.
Support for KQED comes from Fergus Scarborough Architects. FGA is committed to bringing integrity and artistry to the custom Bay Area homes they design, each reflecting how their clients live, play, and work. Visit fg-arch.com. And Geico, protecting people and their vehicles for over 75 years. Geico is proud to offer emergency roadside service to Bay Area drivers. Learn more at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. Coming up in about 15 minutes right now is KQED's Pendarvis Marshall talks with hip-hop artist and battle rapper Passwords about the emotional benefits of rapping, especially right now. Right now it should be here at 7:35 and again at 9:35 each Sunday morning here on KQED on the radio. It's also available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Barbara Klein with these headlines. Chinese officials say all COVID-19 patients in Wuhan have been discharged from the city's hospitals. The coronavirus was first detected in Wuhan before spreading worldwide. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is confirming more than 30,000 infections in the continent's 54 countries. The death toll is nearing 1,400. Countries in northern Africa account for the most cases. Italy is preparing to announce measures to restart most of its business activity by May 4th. Italy's prime minister says company will have to implement strict safety measures before they'll be allowed to open. I'm Barbara Klein, NPR News.
Time now is 9:20. Support for NPR comes from the George Gund Foundation, working to make Cleveland and Northeast Ohio more globally competitive, livable, sustainable, and just. More information available at gundfoundation.org. And the Walton Family Foundation, celebrating 50 years of Earth Day by working for sustainable food and water today so that communities are stronger tomorrow. More at waltonfamilyfoundation.org. And the listeners of KQED. A heavy fog advisory on the Golden Gate Bridge at this hour. Sunshine later on in the forecast. Temperatures ranging from the low 60s at the coast to the low 80s inland.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Lulu Garcia-Navarro. Get ready for another scramble as struggling small businesses try to grab hold of a financial lifeline. The federal government is restarting an emergency loan program for small businesses tomorrow. That program burned through its first $350 billion in less than 2 weeks. After complaints that some of the money went to big businesses or the preferred customers of big banks, lawmakers directed that a chunk of the new money be funneled through community banks. NPR's Scott Horsley reports on how one small bank has been helping small business customers get to the front of the line.
In the last 3 weeks, Edward Derry and his team at Capital Bank made $172 million in loans to nearly 600 small businesses. That's about as much money as the Maryland-based bank ordinarily lends out in a whole year. And while the ink is barely dry on those loans, Barry's getting ready to do it all over again.
It's like being in a pie eating contest where first prize is more pie.
Barry understood early on in the coronavirus lockdown, small businesses would be desperate for credit and that money for emergency loans would quickly run out. Capital Bank has a long history of working with the Small Business Administration and mom-and-pop borrowers, so the bank could anticipate what the government would be looking for. Barry and his colleagues built their own application website before the rules were even finalized, giving their customers a head start.
We started to kind of lay out end-to-end what do we think needs to happen, knowing there was a lot of empty boxes. And said, well, what do we think the answers are, and write them in pencil or in chalk. And and we'll just write it in ink when the government gives us answers.
This process was more challenging because most of the bank's branches were closed. Barry and the rest of his team were working out of their homes.
I have 3 kids at home or online doing their schoolwork. I got 2 dogs and my wife, and when it gets really crowded or noisy here, I tend to do my conference calls walking around my neighborhood.
Barry pulled bankers off of other projects to work with small business people who needed loans, often at night and on weekends. People like Jennifer Taxon. She's the co-owner of a Washington business that sells light fixtures to commercial and residential customers. Taxon was forced to close her showroom last month and idled some of her 7 employees. She says the personal handholding made a big difference.
Working with our small local bank, knowing who to call, getting guidance without being prompted on how this process works is a whole lot different than not knowing where you upload your documents, not knowing who you call, not hearing back from anybody.
While many customers at big banks were left hanging, Taxon's loan was approved in about a week. And since she's using the money to pay her employees, she doesn't believe she'll have to pay it back.
We just received the funds. We will be bringing on everybody who we've had to either furlough or partially furlough. Next week, we'll have a full staff of gainfully employed people.
Barry says his typical small business borrower has about a dozen employees. He's made loans for as little as $2,500. While some big banks drew complaints, they were only lending money to preferred customers. About a third of Barry's loans went to people who'd never banked with him before. The government is paying bankers both fees and interest to make these loans, but Barry says it also feels like an opportunity for banks to do their part to help those who are hurting.
They're people you know, your neighbors, friends, family members, your local restaurant, your local coffee shop, your pizza parlor, and that's what keeps people working so hard.
Barry and his colleagues have been busy preparing a new batch of applications for when the program restarts tomorrow with another $320 billion. Once again, that money is likely to go quickly. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Idi Amin, Fidel Castro, Enver Hoxha, Saddam Hussein, and Pol Pot. Sure, they were ruthless leaders, but more importantly, what did they eat? Journalist Witold Zablowski once trained as a chef in his native Poland, and he says he often found the best stories in the kitchen. That's what inspired him to track down the chefs who cooked for some of the world's most violent leaders. In the new book, How to Feed a Dictator, Zablowski profiles these chefs of these 5 dictators to paint intimate portraits of how they were at home and at the table.
When I read about Pol Pot, when I was researching for the book, I read somewhere that he liked the heart of copra. So I thought, like, this is the very dictatorship-ish story. But then I went to the chef and she told me it never happened. He didn't like the snakes, like he was eating chicken and fish.
It took Zablowski 4 years to track down the chefs and get them to talk.
Saddam's chef, Mr. Abu Ali, he was the hardest one, first to find, and secondly to talk with. Like, firstly, he was terrified because they thought that when the American troops come to Baghdad, he was afraid of being, taken to Guantanamo, tortured, and maybe executed or having some other troubles. But then hiding became part of his DNA. And even when my great Iraqi fixer managed to find him, he didn't want to talk. Like, he didn't dream about some weird guy from Poland finding him and making him speak.
And he had amazing stories. I mean, I spent many years in Iraq, and, some of these stories I really hadn't heard. Saddam's chef had real access to him and his household. Tell me a little bit about the life of a chef like that.
I think you can say that the chefs, usually they have amazing perspective. Like, they are very close, but at the same time, they are the guys who could possibly poison the dictator. So it's a tricky position. You're a mother and an enemy at the same time. So Saddam was not good for Iraqi people, for the world, but he had this instinct to treat his personnel well, the people that were working with him. And the chef is mentioning the expensive gifts he has got from Saddam, gold watches, and he had new clothes. But it was always a tricky position. It was always a dangerous job.
Well, let's talk
talk about Idi Amin, speaking of tricky jobs, I have to say Idi Amin's chef in particular seemed to have been drawn into the intrigue. I mean, he was almost killed by Amin many times, once because his son got indigestion.
Oh yeah, so once the son of Idi Amin had some stomach problems, and immediately Amin came with his pistol to the kitchen and took the first chef that was working right after the door, put a gun into his head and said that if the kid dies, I'm going to kill all of you. And those people were scared, like they had very good salary, and you had an access to food in countries where there were a lot of hungry people. But at the same time, you could have been killed at any moment.
But at the same time, Idi Amin's chef allowed his boss to buy women and even wives for him. Some of these people don't seem like very pleasant characters, really. They might have compromised themselves in their service.
Well, sometimes they are very easy to like, but sometimes they are very easy to hate. Like, they are not easy characters because it wasn't an easy job.
And many of them ultimately ended up poor and in disgrace. It was sort of striking to me how you met these people many years after they'd served these dictators, and none of them